I didn't almost die doing something heroic. I didn't save anyone, or run into danger, or push my body past some proud limit. I almost died in a Costco aisle, holding a bulky pack of paper towels like it was the most important thing in the world. 1 second I was standing under those bright warehouse lights, listening to the usual noise, carts rattling, scanners beeping, people talking over each other, and the next second my vision narrowed into a thin tunnel, like someone quietly turned down the world. My legs didn't cramp or stumble. They just stopped obeying, as if a switch inside me flipped to off without asking permission. I tried to laugh it off in my head, because that's what I did with everything. I tried to tell myself it was just skipping lunch, just another long shift, just a little dizziness that would pass. Even as my palms slapped the side of the cart for balance and missed, even as the cold, polished concrete rushed up to meet me, my first feeling wasn't fear. It was embarrassment. I don't know what you would feel in my place, but imagine it for a second. Imagine lying on a public floor, your heart doing something wrong inside your chest, and your biggest instinct is still to look fine. Then I heard my wife's voice, thin and shaking, coming through someone's phone nearby. Not angry, not irritated, just scared in a way that made her sound older than I remembered. And something inside me cracked, because I realized the scariest part wasn't that strangers were watching. The scariest part was the thought that my family had already started adjusting to life without me, quietly, patiently, day by day, while I kept telling myself I'd slow down later. And right there, staring up at fluorescent lights that suddenly felt harsh and unforgiving, I understood I might not get a later. I'm 44, and for most of my adult life, I built my whole identity around one word: reliable. On paper, it looks noble. I'm a warehouse supervisor, the guy who keeps the whole operation from tipping over when the day goes sideways. I know every dock door that sticks, every forklift that whines when it's overloaded, every employee who quietly holds the place together without getting credit for it. When a shipment runs late, when someone calls out, when a manager panics because the numbers don't add up, I'm the one they come looking for. I like being that person. I liked the way people relaxed when I walked into a problem, like my presence alone meant it would get handled. But there's a private cost to being the steady one, and nobody claps for that part. Being reliable meant I never rested, because rest felt like laziness in a world that rewarded stamina. It meant I ignored my body like it was background noise. If I got headaches, I blamed the lights. If my chest felt tight, I blamed stress. If my heart raced, I blamed caffeine. I told myself I didn't have time to be sick. I didn't have time to sit in a waiting room. I didn't have time to be the guy who needed help. So I lived on shortcuts. Energy drinks in the morning, salty snacks grabbed between tasks, fast food eaten one-handed while staring at a screen. I slept in broken pieces and called it normal. I wore exhaustion like proof that I was providing. At home, the same word, reliable, translated into something colder. My marriage didn't blow up. It just slowly went quiet, the way a radio goes quiet when you turn the volume down one notch at a time. My wife used to bring up my health directly. She'd say I was pushing too hard, that I was always running on fumes, that I snapped over nothing, that I looked older than I was. I'd deflect with jokes. I'd say I'd get checked after the next busy season. And eventually she stopped arguing, not because she stopped caring, but because she'd learned my answers were automatic. My son adapted in the smallest ways. He didn't stop loving me. He just stopped expecting me. He started asking his mom first, stopped waiting for my car in the driveway, stopped lighting up when I said, maybe. I don't know if you've ever watched someone you love quietly lower their expectations to protect their own heart, but it leaves a mark. And I kept telling myself it was temporary, that once things calmed down, I'd show up more, I'd be present, I'd fix the distance. The truth is, time gets spent whether you're paying attention or not. And by the time I walked into Costco that Saturday, I wasn't living like a man who was close to breaking. I was living like a man who thought breaking was for someone else. If I'm honest, the collapse didn't come out of nowhere. I told myself it did, because out of nowhere feels cleaner. It lets you believe it was random, bad luck, one freak moment. But when I look back now, with the kind of clarity you only get after you've been forced to slow down, I can see a trail of warning signs behind me like footprints in snow. They were small at first, easy to ignore. I'd get these headaches that felt like pressure behind my eyes, especially late in the day when the warehouse lights had been buzzing over my head for 10 hours straight. I'd rub my temples, drink more caffeine, and keep moving. Sometimes I'd stand up too fast and the room would tilt for a second, and I'd joke about getting old, like it was funny instead of alarming. There were nights I'd come home, sit down on the edge of the bed to take my boots off, and realize my heart was still racing like I'd been running. Not from exercise, from stress, from adrenaline that never fully turned off. I'd lie there listening to my own pulse in my ears, and instead of thinking, this isn't normal, I'd think, tomorrow's going to be worse, so get some sleep. My wife noticed before I did, or maybe she noticed before I admitted it. She'd look at me across the kitchen table and ask if I was okay, and I'd give her the same answer every time. I'm fine, just tired. Busy week. She'd tell me I should get my blood pressure checked. I'd laugh and say, what am I, 90? And she'd go quiet in that way that wasn't dramatic, just tired. Not tired like me, physically drained, but tired in the heart. My son started catching it too, in the way kids do when they learn what the air in a room means. He'd come into my space with a question, see my face, and decide it wasn't the right moment. He'd back out like he was trying not to bother me, and every time it happened I'd tell myself, later. I'll make it up later. I don't know if you've ever made that promise to yourself so many times it starts to feel like a lie you don't even notice anymore. But that's where I was living. The week before Costco, there was a moment that should have stopped me cold. I was standing by the loading dock, watching a truck get positioned, and I suddenly felt this wave of lightheadedness so strong I had to grip the edge of a pallet to steady myself. My hands went slightly numb, like pins and needles. My vision sparkled at the edges for a second. A guy working nearby asked if I was all right, and I forced a grin and told him I just hadn't eaten yet. That was the truth, but it wasn't the point. The point was that my body had started sending me messages in plain language, and I kept responding like it was background noise. I treated every symptom like an inconvenience, something to push through, because pushing through was what I'd trained myself to do. Try to picture this for a moment. A grown man, responsible for an entire operation, capable of making decisions that affect dozens of people, but too stubborn to make one simple decision for himself, to sit down, to get checked, to take his own health seriously. That Saturday, I finished my shift feeling off. Not sick, not flu-like, just wrong. Like I was slightly detached from my own body. My shoulders ached, my eyes felt gritty, and there was this faint hum in my chest that I didn't know how to describe. I blamed it on skipping lunch and the fact that I'd been running on caffeine and willpower since sunrise. I told myself Costco would be quick. Grab what we needed, go home, shower, sit down, be present, and I truly believed that. But even as I walked through those sliding doors, even as the cold air hit my face and the smell of baked goods mixed with cleaning supplies, a part of me felt uneasy, like my body was trying to warn me one last time. I just didn't know how to listen yet. Costco always felt like its own weather system, bright, cold, and loud in a way that never fully registered until you were already inside it. The air conditioning hit me first, raising goosebumps on my forearms. The overhead lights were so clean and white they made everything look slightly unreal, like a set built to imitate normal life. Rows and rows of bulk items. Families moving like slow rivers with carts. The steady beep of scanners somewhere near the front. The faint smell of detergent and baked bread mixing together in a way that didn't make sense, but still felt familiar. I grabbed a cart and told myself I'd be in and out. My list was short. A few groceries, a pack of chicken, something my wife had texted me about for my son's lunches. I remember thinking, as I turned into the main aisle, that I'd make it home early enough to actually sit at the table. That was my idea of making things right. Small promises, delayed again and again, but still promises. The first rail warning came near the paper goods. It wasn't a dramatic pain. It was a shift. Like the floor moved half an inch and my brain took an extra second to catch up. My heart thumped hard once, then again, not fast like after running, but uneven, like it couldn't decide what rhythm it belonged to. I paused with one hand on the cart handle, pretending I was comparing brands while I waited for the sensation to pass. I told myself, hydrate, eat something, you're fine. Then my vision narrowed. Not blurry, narrow. The edges of the world started fading, and the sound around me went slightly muffled, like cotton had been pressed into my ears. I swallowed and felt my throat stick, dry and tight. A thin cold sweat popped across my back under my work shirt. I tried to walk it off. That's the ugly truth. My first reaction wasn't to ask for help or sit down. It was to keep moving so no one would notice. There's a pride that comes with being the capable one, and it can turn into something dangerous because it convinces you that needing help is a kind of failure. I made it maybe 3 steps before my legs went strange, heavy, delayed, like the signal from my brain was arriving late. I gripped the cart harder, and for a second I thought I could muscle through it. Then my knees softened, not like they buckled, but like they simply stopped holding me. My hand slid along the cart handle. The pack of paper towels I'd lifted without thinking slipped out of my grasp. And the next moment was not dramatic at all. It was quiet. My palm slapped the cart frame as I tried to catch myself, and I missed. My shoulder brushed something soft, maybe someone's sleeve, maybe the edge of the display. Then the floor met me with a blunt, cold certainty. Not a slam. A landing. I lay there staring sideways at the bottom shelf of the aisle, my cheek pressed against concrete, so cold it felt wet. The world kept moving above me. Carts rolling, footsteps shifting, a child asking a question, someone gasping, someone saying "sir," like they didn't know if they were allowed to say it louder. Try to put yourself in that silence with me for a moment. You're not floating, you're not dreaming, you're right there on the ground, and you can hear life continuing a few feet away as if your body isn't allowed to interrupt the schedule. A woman knelt beside me. I saw her shoes first, then her face sliding into view, concerned but steady. "Can you hear me?" she asked. I wanted to answer. I swear I did. But my mouth felt disconnected from my thoughts. My tongue was heavy. Even blinking felt like work. My chest was tight in a way that made me focus on breathing like it was a skill I'd forgotten. I managed a small nod. Someone said they'd called 911. Someone else said not to move me. My ears kept catching words and losing them, like my brain was buffering. I heard blood pressure and sweaty, and is he diabetic? And I wanted to tell them no. I just worked too hard, but I couldn't shape it into speech. Then a phone was put near someone's ear, and I heard my wife's voice through the speaker. At first it was just her saying my name, fast, repeating it like she could pull me back into the moment with sound alone. The tone of her voice did something to me that the cold floor and the panic couldn't. It stripped away the tough guy act in one breath. She sounded terrified, and she was trying not to, because that's what you do when you think someone's life depends on your calm. I tried to lift my hand, just to show her I was here, but my arm only twitched. The paramedics arrived like a scene change. Suddenly the aisle wasn't just a store aisle anymore. It became a small, controlled zone. A bag opened. Velcro ripped. A cuff tightened on my arm so hard it bit into my skin. Sticky pads went onto my chest under my shirt with practiced speed. One of them spoke to me in a firm, reassuring voice, telling me to keep breathing, telling me they were right here, telling me my name again to keep me anchored. My vision swam. The lights above me looked too bright and too far away. When they lifted me onto the gurney, the movement made my stomach roll. I heard the squeak of wheels, the murmur of people stepping aside. I caught a glimpse of faces, strangers with concern, strangers with curiosity, strangers already returning to their shopping as soon as I was no longer on the floor. And then I was rolling past the registers, past the exit, past the normal world. Outside, the air hit me warmer than I expected. The sky looked painfully ordinary. Cars moved through the parking lot like nothing had happened. The ambulance doors opened, and the interior was a bright, clinical box. White surfaces, strapped equipment, the smell of something sharp and clean that reminded me of school nurse offices. The siren started as we pulled out, and it cut through me like a warning I'd ignored too many times. Inside the ambulance, I drifted in and out. The monitor beside me beeped with a steady insistence, and every beep felt like a reminder that my body was being counted, measured, watched, like I couldn't pretend anymore. One of the paramedics asked me questions between checking numbers. Any history of high blood pressure, any chest pain, any dizziness before today. I heard myself make a sound that was supposed to be no, even though I knew it wasn't true. Not really, because I had a history. I just never called it that. I called it being tired, being stressed, being busy. At the hospital, everything sped up. Doors, voices, hands adjusting my position, a bright hallway sliding overhead. The smell changed, more antiseptic, more plastic, more air that felt processed. Someone told me they were going to stabilize my rhythm and run tests. Someone said arrhythmia and blood pressure and exhaustion like they were pieces of a puzzle that had been on the table for years. Then a doctor leaned close enough that I could see the lines at the corners of his eyes and said they were going to give me medication to help me rest while they worked, just for a short time, just to keep everything controlled. I remember trying to argue, not out loud, but inside. I can handle it. I can stay awake. I'm fine. But my body had stopped negotiating. The last clear sensation I had was the cool sting of something in my foreline, and the feeling of the hospital sheet under my fingers, thin, stiff, unfamiliar. The beeping softened. The voices turned into distant echoes. And as the sedation pulled me under, my mind didn't go to work schedules or warehouse problems. It went to the people I loved, and to all the laters I'd piled up like boxes in a back room, assuming I'd have time to open them one day. Sedation isn't sleep the way people imagine it. It's not a clean blackout. It's more like sinking into thick water where sounds still reach you, but they arrive warped and delayed. Time doesn't behave normally. You don't dream in scenes. You drift through fragments, sensations, memories, half-thoughts, like your mind is rummaging through drawers you haven't opened in years. I couldn't move. I couldn't open my eyes. But I could hear things around me in dull pulses, the steady beep of a monitor, the soft hiss of oxygen somewhere, the squeak of shoes on a shiny floor. Even with my eyes closed, the hospital lights felt present, cold brightness pressing through my eyelids like the world refused to dim. And in that space, there was no tunnel of light, no angels, no voice from beyond, just me and the parts of my life I'd been too busy to sit with. The first thing that hit me wasn't fear of dying. It was this sharp, sinking awareness that I'd been living like time was an unlimited resource, like it was something I could borrow against forever without interest. I had treated my body like a machine built to take abuse, and I had treated my family like they'd always be there, waiting patiently while I finished whatever I thought mattered more. Have you ever had a moment where you suddenly realize the story you've been telling yourself doesn't match reality anymore? Where the excuses stop sounding clever and start sounding small? That's what it felt like. A memory surfaced. My son, smaller, maybe 8 or 9, standing in the doorway of my room holding a baseball glove that looked too big for his hands. He had that hopeful seriousness kids get when they're asking for something that matters to them. He wanted me to teach him how to throw properly. Not a quick toss. A real lesson. He'd been waiting all day, building up the courage to ask, and when he finally did, I barely looked up from my phone. I said, "Later, bud. I'm wiped." In the memory, he nodded like it was fine. He didn't cry. He didn't argue. He just walked away quietly, because that's what he'd learned to do when I wasn't available. And then my mind did something cruel. It fast-forwarded. It showed me him older, shoulders broader, voice deeper, not asking anymore. Not waiting at the window. Not hoping I'd come outside. Just moving on. I felt something in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart rhythm. A grief that didn't have a clear shape, because it wasn't grief for a single moment. It was grief for a pattern. For years of small disappointments that had stacked up until they became a kind of normal. Then came my wife. Not a single big argument. Not some dramatic betrayal. Just her face in ordinary light, standing at the kitchen counter while I walked past her again, distracted, tired, halfway present. I saw the exact moment she stopped trying to convince me. It wasn't anger. It was resignation. She'd been speaking and I'd been half listening, giving her the same lines I always gave. Promises without dates, jokes without change. And in that memory, she paused, looked at me like she was studying something she couldn't fix, and then her expression softened into something that hurt more than fury. Acceptance. Not acceptance of my behavior as okay, but acceptance that this was who I'd chosen to be. That I was going to keep spending myself on everything outside the house and coming home with whatever scraps were left. Try to feel what I felt, just for a second. Not the fear of losing your life, but the fear that you wasted it while you were still breathing. Another memory surfaced, my dad's voicemail. His name on my phone. Missed call. The little transcription underneath. Call me when you can. I remembered hearing it while I was driving, thinking I'd call back after I parked, and then forgetting because something at work came up. Then another missed call. Then another. In that inner space, I could hear his voice clearer than I'd heard it in years. Not dramatic, not pleading, just older, softer, like he didn't have the energy for long conversations anymore. And I realized with a kind of nausea that time doesn't just run out for you. It runs out for everyone around you, too. While you're postponing, Other people are aging. Other people are waiting. Other people are quietly letting go. Somewhere beyond those memories, I heard real voices, doctors, nurses, coming and going like tides. I caught phrases that floated through the sedation fog. Pressure's been running high. Likely untreated hypertension. Rhythm event. We're stabilizing. And that was another twist of the knife, because it meant this wasn't random. This wasn't lightning from a clear sky. This was my body keeping a ledger and finally presenting the bill. I remember a moment where the beeping steadied. The room grew calmer. And in that calm, I felt the first truly deep breath my body had taken in a long time. It wasn't even a conscious breath. It was like my nervous system finally unclenched for half a second. And that breath hit me harder than the collapse, because it made me realize how long I'd been living with my shoulders up around my ears, jaw tight, chest tight, always bracing for the next problem, always rushing, always carrying pressure like it was normal. Then there was a small, strange moment of jealousy. In the haze, I heard another patient somewhere nearby, and I heard a child's voice and a man's voice. Another dad, speaking gently, present, fully there. I couldn't see them, but I could hear the steadiness, the comfort. And I felt this ugly little spike inside me. He gets to be that dad. He gets to show up. It lasted maybe a second before shame swallowed it whole. Because I could have been that dad too. There was no rule preventing it. No law. No curse. Just choices, thousands of small choices, made over years. I don't know what you would do with that kind of clarity. I only know what happened to me. In that inner space, with my body quiet and my mind stripped raw, I finally understood something simple and brutal. Love doesn't survive on intention. Love survives on presence. And if I didn't come back from this, if my heart decided it was done, my family wouldn't just lose me. They would lose all the versions of me I kept promising they'd get someday. The father who would show up. The husband who would listen. The man who would slow down and finally act like being alive was something worth protecting. And the thought that I might die with those promises still unfinished, that was the sentence that broke me, even before I woke up. Coming back felt like swimming up through thick, heavy layers. At first there was only sound, distant, muffled, repetitive. A steady beep that didn't belong to any room I recognized. The soft hiss of air moving through tubing. The rustle of fabric. Footsteps that came and went. My mind grabbed at these noises like they were handholds, trying to pull itself towards something solid. Then sensation returned in pieces. The dryness in my mouth was the first thing I noticed, like my tongue had turned to sandpaper. My throat felt scraped and tight. There was a weight in my arm wherein 4 lines sat taped down, and a dull ache in my chest. Not sharp pain, more like soreness from being handled and monitored and prodded. When I tried to open my eyes, the light stabbed through me. Not because it was bright like sunshine, but because it was clinical, flat, white, relentless. My eyelids fluttered and I squeezed them shut again, instinctively, like my body was still trying to hide. A nurse's voice reached me, close and calm. "Hey, you're waking up. Take your time." I wanted to speak, but my voice came out as something thin and useless, more breath than sound. I swallowed, and it hurt. My hands felt clumsy, like they didn't belong to me yet. I tried to move my fingers just to prove I could, and I watched them twitch under the blanket with a strange, quiet gratitude. It's hard to explain how humbling it is to be thankful for your own hand obeying you. The nurse leaned in and checked the monitor, then looked back at me with the kind of steady expression people have when they've seen 100 versions of fear and don't judge any of them. "You had an arrhythmia event," she said gently, like she was placing the truth in my palm. "Your blood pressure's been very high. We stabilized you. You're okay right now." Right now? Those 2 words landed with weight. Because right now implied there was an alternate version of this story where I wasn't. I don't know what you would feel in that moment, but picture it for a second. Your whole life reduced to numbers on a screen, and a stranger telling you you're still here, as if being alive is something you're receiving rather than something you're entitled to. My eyes drifted toward the room. Curtains. A plastic cup with a straw I wasn't allowed to use yet. The stiff, white hospital sheets that smelled like bleach and warmth. A clock on the wall that felt offensive in its normality, as if time hadn't just threatened to stop for me. And then I heard my wife. Not a phone this time. Her voice was right outside the curtain, close enough that I could hear the tremble she was trying to hide. It wasn't words at first. It was a sound, an inhale that caught halfway, like she'd been holding herself together for hours and it was finally slipping. Someone pulled the curtain back, and there she was. I had seen her every day, technically. We lived in the same house. But seeing her in that room was different. The hospital light showed details I'd been too busy to notice. Tiredness around her eyes, the way her shoulders were held tight, the way she looked like she'd aged a year in a day. Her hair wasn't done. Her face was bare. She looked like she'd run on instinct alone to get here. For a second she just stared at me, like she needed proof I was real. Then her mouth trembled and she stepped closer, fast, and grabbed my hand with both of hers. Her fingers were cold. "Hi," she whispered, and the word cracked on the way out. I tried to squeeze back, and I did, but it was weak. It didn't matter. She clung to it like it was the only solid thing in the world. And then my son appeared behind her. He looked too grown all at once. Not a little kid anymore, not yet a man, but standing in that doorway with a kind of stiff bravery that made my throat tighten. His eyes were red. He'd been crying, but he was trying not to show it. He kept his face under control the way he'd probably seen me keep mine under control, like emotion was something you managed, not something you let out. He didn't rush in like a movie. He took a careful step, like he didn't know if he was allowed to get close yet. I watched him look at the wires, the monitor, the 4-line, the hospital bed. I watched him process it, silently, because kids do that. They take in the reality first, then decide where to put their feelings. I opened my mouth to say his name, to say I was sorry, to say 100 things that had been stuck in my chest for years. But nothing came out in time, because before I could speak, I heard him say it. One simple sentence, quiet, almost like he was talking to himself in the hallway more than talking to me. He said, "I thought this was just how it was going to be now." Not angry, not dramatic, resigned, as if he'd already accepted the idea of a life where his dad was always half gone, always exhausted, always unreachable, and now maybe gone for real. That sentence didn't hit me like guilt. It hit me like a truth I'd been avoiding. Because the worst part wasn't that he thought I might die. The worst part was that he'd already been preparing for my absence while I was still alive. My wife's grip tightened, and I felt her shake. A tear slid down her cheek and dropped onto the back of my hand. It was warm. It was real. It felt heavier than any lecture. Try to feel what I felt in that moment, even briefly. The shock of realizing you have been physically present in your own home, but emotionally missing for years. I finally found my voice, broken and small. "I'm here," I whispered. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't say it like a promise. I said it like a decision. Recovery didn't feel like a victory lap. It felt like being handed my life back with conditions attached. The hospital part was the easy part in some ways, because everything was measured there. Nurses checked my blood pressure like it was a sacred ritual. Doctors spoke in calm, precise sentences about medication, lifestyle changes, follow-up appointments, stress management. The monitor beeped steadily, and every steady beat felt like proof I'd been spared. But the harder part started when the immediate danger passed. Because once the 4 came out and the paperwork was signed, I had to go back to being myself. And my old self had built an entire routine around ignoring discomfort, pushing through fatigue, and treating care as something other people needed. The first morning at home, I woke up in my own bed and didn't recognize the quiet. Not because my house was different, but because I was. I lay there listening to the normal sounds, the fridge humming, a distant car outside, the soft creak of the house settling, and it felt strange, almost suspicious, like my nervous system was waiting for a crisis to justify its existence. My wife came into the room holding a glass of water and my new pill bottle. No jokes, no casualness, just a steady look that said, without words, "We're not doing the old version of this anymore." I took the pills in silence, and it was humbling how emotional that simple act felt. I used to think strength was grit. That morning, strength was swallowing something I didn't want to need and admitting I did. My son hovered in the doorway like he wasn't sure where to place himself. Not because he didn't care, but because he'd built habits around my absence. Kids adapt fast. They learn what not to ask for. They learn what disappointments to stop expecting. I could see him watching me the way you watch a repaired object you don't fully trust yet. Careful, hopeful, waiting for proof. So I started with small, unglamorous things. I sat at the table for breakfast instead of eating standing up. I asked him about school and didn't look at my phone. I listened long enough to hear the pauses, the places where he used to stop because he assumed I'd drift away. I didn't fill those pauses with advice or jokes. I just stayed. Have you ever noticed how hard it is to simply stay present when your whole life has trained you to escape into productivity? To fix, to solve, to rush? The first walk after dinner nearly embarrassed me. Not because it was physically impossible, but because it revealed how far I'd let things slide. My legs felt heavy. My breathing was shallow. My chest didn't hurt, but it felt sensitive, like a bruise you're afraid to touch. My wife walked beside me at an easy pace, and my son trailed a few steps behind, hands in his pockets, pretending he wasn't watching. Halfway around the block, I saw another dad in our neighborhood jogging with his kid on a bike. The dad's hand kept hovering near the seat, as if the kid might fall, even though the kid was fine. It was such a small gesture, protective, automatic, that it punched me in the stomach. Not jealousy this time. Regret. Because I could picture all the moments my son had been fine, while still needing me close, and how often my hand wasn't there. When I got my first follow-up appointment scheduled, I almost backed out. Old instincts kicked in. The voice in my head said, "You're okay now. Don't waste time. Don't be dramatic. You've got work." But then I remembered my son's sentence in the hallway, how resigned it sounded, and I forced myself to go anyway. Sitting in that waiting room felt like a confession. I watched people around me flipping through magazines, staring at their phones, tapping their feet. I realized we were all there for the same reason, because our bodies eventually demand honesty. When the nurse took my blood pressure and raised her eyebrows slightly, she didn't scold me. She just said, matter of fact, that it had probably been high for a long time, and that my event wasn't random. That word again, not random. I walked out of that appointment feeling two things at once: relief that I wasn't dead, and grief that I'd needed a collapse in public to start behaving like my life mattered. I talked to my boss about adjusting my schedule. That conversation scared me more than I expected. Work had always been the place where I felt competent, where I knew the rules. But I did it anyway, voice steady, because for the first time I understood that providing isn't only about money. Providing is also about being there. At home, I apologized properly. Not the kind of apology that sneaks in excuses, like, "I'm sorry, but work has been crazy," or, "I'm sorry, you know how I am." I sat with my wife at the kitchen table after my son went to bed, and I said the words that had been stuck behind my pride for years. "I made you live like you were alone," I told her, "even when I was right here." She didn't forgive me like flipping a switch. She didn't wrap it up with a neat speech. She just looked at me for a long time, eyes tired, and nodded once like she was letting herself believe I meant it. And I did. The change wasn't dramatic. It was repetitive. It was boring in the best way. Meals together, even when I was tired. Walks, even when the couch called my name. Doctor's appointments kept, not postponed. Water instead of energy drinks. Sleep treated like something sacred, not optional. And most importantly, moments with my son where I didn't say later, because I finally understood something I'd been refusing to face. Later is not a guarantee. Later is a story we tell ourselves so we don't have to change today. I still go to Costco sometimes, and I always notice that aisle. Not because it's haunted, not because I'm afraid of paper towels. I notice it because it reminds me how ordinary the edge can look. How quickly a normal day can turn into a moment where your body stops negotiating and life stops waiting for you to catch up. What changed me wasn't the ambulance or the monitors or the medical words. What changed me was my son's quiet resignation. How he sounded like a kid who had already practiced losing me, not in one dramatic moment, but slowly, over years of "I'm tired" and "not now" and "after work." That sentence didn't shame me into becoming perfect. It just woke me up into being present. Just picture this for a moment. You're given one more chance, not because you earned it, but because you got lucky, and you suddenly see how many small moments you've been spending like they don't matter. I don't know what your life looks like on the outside. I don't know what you carry or what you tell yourself you'll handle later. But have you ever ignored something important until it was almost too late? Have you ever assumed the people you love will always be there, steady and patient, while you run yourself into the ground? I'm not saying work is evil. I'm not saying ambition is wrong. I'm saying time gets spent no matter what, and love doesn't survive on good intentions alone. If you still have the chance to say something kind, to show up for one small moment, to book the appointment you keep avoiding, to sit at the table instead of walking past it, don't leave it for later. You might not notice it every day, but being loved and having someone to love may be the rarest gift we get in this life.